ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my channel for another Hot Toys Iron Man diecast figure unboxing and review video. Now, today we're going to be taking a look at an already released figure. This isn't a 2.0, this is literally a straight up re-release of the Spider-Man Homecoming Iron Man Mark 47. Now, the whole backstory behind this guy was, when he first came out, nobody really wanted him. He sat on shelves for ages, and all of a sudden, he was bought up. He was sold out. Nobody could get their hands on this guy. And as the years passed, the prices started to skyrocket. Then, of course, enter Hot Toys now with the re-release of the Mark 47. Not often do they actually go ahead and do this without any changes, so I hope to see a couple of little updates here and there, but I'm not holding my breath. Now, if you did miss out on the first version of the Mark 47, or I should say, the original, this new one is in stock right now with toyswonderland.com, and of course the link for that is down in the description below. While you're down there, if you do like seeing really early Hot Toys and third-party content, why not hit that subscribe and bell notification icon so you're notified as soon as brand new content goes live on the channel. What we're gonna do now though is get the box laying flat in the light box and do the unboxing. And here we have the box art for the Mark 47, the new version, but as you can see, it kind of is the same image that we got on the previous release. They have though changed a couple of things, namely the positioning of Iron Man himself, the backdrop image, and some of the graphics, as well as the actual construction of the box. The previous one had this big sort of silver chunky piece down the bottom that slid off, then you slid off the top, and the foam insert was on the inside, whereas this one is more of a draw system where it just slides out nice and easily. But still, I do like this piece of artwork. You will be able to tell if you do have the new one or the old one simply by looking at the box alone, which I think was a key reason why Hot Toys made it a little bit different. I don't actually know what design of the Mark 47 they were going off here. It kind of looks a little bit more alien-like in the faceplate, kind of almost like the Avengers video game, but still, it's a cool piece of art. I do also like the metallic sort of pearlescent effect over the front of the box, and you can see that image does wrap around the side, and on the back you do have a spider web with that metallic effect as well. Now, sliding this out here, it is nice and straightforward to do, and it is of course one of those nice black foam inserts that we've been getting for recent diecast releases. Now, when it comes to the reissued Mark 47, I have been rather excited to take a look, mostly to see if there are any differences. We did get the homemade suit recently for Spider-Man Far From Home, and it did have a couple of differences as well, but here we have the Mark 47 in all its glory. A grail for a lot of people. It was for me back in the day, but I managed to pick up the original. Now, of course, we do have the opportunity for all of those who missed out to go ahead and pick yourself up this piece of badass metal armor, and it looks fantastic. Now, you can see the first layer of accessories, a bunch of stuff there, and the benefit with the Mark 47 is he does come with a second tray with even more goodness. So what we're going to do now is get all of this stuff in the box, laid out in the light box, and take a closer look at everything he comes with. And here we have all of the accessories that come with the new Iron Man Mark 47. Now, bear in mind, this is one of the only re-releases that come with everything that came with the original. Usually they're missing one key accessory to still give the original a little bit more value. But if anything, there have been a couple of changes here which make this version the superior over the original, which is crazy considering how much people are still asking for that one on eBay. But nevertheless, let's take a look at the display base first. As you can see, Spider-Man Homecoming and Iron Man on the front. Thank goodness, a metal nameplate. And no, before everyone freaks out, this isn't actually all scratched up. It's a piece of plastic, you can remove it, and it is perfectly clean underneath. I do like the web effect on the sides there, and of course Iron Man flying past his name, a very classy effect. Now, comparing it to the original, you can see they are pretty much identical, except the one on the right here is a little bit more dim, and also there's a hell of a lot more blue, whereas this one a little bit more punchy and less of that blue across the top here. Not a huge difference, but definitely one to point out. Now, let's take a look at the head sculpt itself. This is the exact same sculpt, but there are actually differences, notably in the paintwork and also in the actual sculpt details. They just seem to pop more on the new one. I don't know why. You can see the texture a hell of a lot more on the new one versus the original. It's a slightly darker paint application, a little bit less texture, a little bit less detail. I 100% hands down prefer this new one compared to the old one. Good for the time, don't get me wrong, but this one definitely shows it up. Look how good this Robert Downey Jr. likeness is. One of the best, obviously the latest in terms of the paint application process, and it looks fantastic. Now, of course, he does come with a couple of head sculpt accessories, first being his little sunglasses. You can, of course, pop them on there. Really nice, fairly basic, and they get the job done. Now, this piece is, for some reason, one of the most sought-after accessories on the market. A lot of people picked up the Mark 46 concept art figure, wanted to install a head sculpt, and when they did, found out that this piece is kind of essential without making the neck look all types of gappy. So this piece tends to actually fetch a fair amount on eBay. Let's be honest, it's just a basic neck piece, so if you are looking to pick it up, this might be your opportunity to pick up a badass Mark 47 at the same time and score yourself a neck piece adapter rather than paying the inflated prices on eBay. Now, the benefit of the Mark 47 is he does come with some flight accessory pieces, the first of which being these, but for some reason, they're for the feet, and the way I'm saying it indicates that I'm kind of confused, and that's because I am, because he does come with a regular crotch grabber attachment, so therefore, if his feet are supposed to be flat on the display base, you can't pose him flying. How is he supposed to use these without toppling over? It's just weird. I'm glad they gave us some effect pieces, but then again, I kind of don't know why they're included if with the stock display base you can't really use them anyway. Now, he does come with more blast effects on the hands themselves. These ones are slightly thinner, but they are just as long. As you can see, they are painted using the same process, a little bit of orange, then clear plastic. I would have liked slightly more detail in the paint application, but don't get me wrong, they're just supposed to be blast effects and they do the job quite nicely. And let's take a look at his drone effect pieces. As you can see, they have their own effects there, and of course the little drones can be detached from the flame, and also they do articulate. They are fairly nicely weathered, these pieces are nicely done, and of course you can pose them however you like, although my second one for some reason has a tentacle that doesn't really like to, number one, sit straight. As you can see, they are angled significantly, and I don't know why they can't be rotated, and also this one is a little bit floppy. I don't know exactly what happened in the molding process to make it like that, but there have definitely been some mold degradations. Now here we have the little drone piece that those pods did come out of. Interesting to note that in both Spider-Man movies we did get some sort of Stark Tech drone, obviously this one in Homecoming and the Edith drones in Far From Home, but nevertheless you can see there is a significant difference in the realistic paint application. There's a lot more weathering on the new one on pretty much both sides. You can see it especially with the silver on the top there and around the sides there. On the new one, it's just a hell of a lot more detailed, and I honestly do prefer the way it looks. The way you do use it with the display base though is you pretty much use it in the exact same method. It's got a bendy wire here and it clips onto this piece so you can have it posed next to or around your Mark 47. Now this piece is one that a lot of people really did like, me included, and it is the empty helmet, and it looks great. You can see there's some detail on the inside there. A faceplate is nicely detailed. It can still adhere to the top. Definitely something that I'm considering using now that I have two Mark 47s. The only real downside with this one is there's no ball joint at the head itself. It's just down at the lower part of the neck, so you don't get any articulation. Still though, it's an empty helmet. It makes sense they weren't able to install that joint. Now he does come with some swap out panels, as you can see, some little wrist mounted rockets. Fairly basic in their design. They are magnetic, which is definitely a nice touch, and they are painted fairly nicely. We did of course get those with the original, and we did with these as well, the little missile pod shoulder sections. They are again nicely sculpted, painted, and detailed. The only other pieces that he does come with are of course his hands. He does come with a fair amount, and as you can see, they are again painted nicely. I do like the silver. It looks really nice. There's a depth to it. It's not just a basic flat silver, just like the original, and the red also has a very nice sort of gloss effect. I cannot wait to compare the actual figure himself to the original, so without further ado, what we're gonna do now is get the new Mark 47 out here and take a closer look. And here we have the Mark 47 standing straight up and down the lightbox, no crazy poses or accessories or anything like that. And I have to say, this guy still, to this day, takes my breath away. He looks fantastic with the red and the silver and the gunmetal and the gold. It all just meshes so very nicely, and not to mention the cornucopia of lights that are dotted all around the entire thing. He's lit up like a Christmas tree, and while yes, it's a right pain in the you-know-what to install all of the batteries throughout the entire thing with the multiple little trap doors and sneaky areas where the battery compartments are hidden, it still has an absolutely awesome look once you finally get all of that stuff out of the way. And that's not even to mention the blast effects, the swap out accessories, the alternate head sculpt. This guy is pretty much a one-stop shop for a all-around badass looking Iron Man figure. He's got the look, he's got the paint apps, and in my opinion, he's got more than enough accessories to hold his own as one of the best Iron Man figures. Not to mention, he's super unique in terms of how he's painted. As I said, the uniqueness of the color scheme just meshes so very nicely. Now, if you are thinking about picking him up, I would advise kind of doing it now. You don't want to have it like the original release now that he's widely available. People might think, oh, I don't need to rush out and get him. He sells out. Same thing all over again. He's hard to find. Trust me, if you want him, if you even had the slightest inkling of wanting him to go along with your Spidey, do yourself a favor and pick him up, because trust me, he's that darn good. And here we have the Mark 47 himself up close and personal, and of course I've turned all of the lights on. Don't worry, there will be a clip throughout the course of this video where you see them with the lights off in the background so you can see what they look like in a darker lit environment. But even in the harsh light box, I think they light up very nicely. I especially love the eyes. They have the same sort of look that they did in the movie. They're not just one bright piercing white light. There's a little bit of detail in there and I love it. Same thing with the arc reactor, that lights up a treat, and you can see there's a dimensionality to it there. And taking off the chest plate itself, you can definitely see there is a sort of understructure underneath the chest plate and into the arc reactor, and I think the lights really do highlight it very nicely. And in fact, the entire suit has miniature arc reactors dotted around everywhere, even on the arms, and yes, even on the legs. Don't get me wrong, it's a right pain to install all the batteries. There are so many battery compartments, they're fiddly, they're hard to get to, the batteries are super tiny, but once you have them in there, I do think there's no arguing with honestly how good this guy does look. Now, talking about the armor itself, it looks fantastic, just like it did originally. I love the subtle battle damage effect over all the red and gold pieces, but the super clean look on the silver, it's kind of like they took the Mark 46 and of course had to repair it because of what happened in Civil War, and that's what we're left with, a partially repaired Mark 46, which ended up being called the 47. The silver, super nice and clean, same with the gunmetal. I have to say, the paint application does look a little bit sharper than what we saw on the original, and don't worry, we'll be comparing them in just a second. There are actually a couple of subtle changes. Now, he does still maintain the same little flap pieces as you'd expect based off the original Mark 47. It technically is the exact same figure, just popped in the box. There's not a hell of a lot to talk about on here in terms of the changes. Now, moving on to the legs themselves, you can see they are nice and thick and chunky, and there is a lot of diecast in there. The weight is definitely present, and I love the way it feels in hand, just like all of the other diecast releases. Now, yes, you can see that there is that subtle change on the leg there compared to what we got with the Mark 46. I missed that originally, and I'm sorry that I didn't point it out in the original Mark 47 review, but now that we've got a chance to redo it, I like to definitely mention that there is a couple of subtle changes. There are a couple of different line panels as well that have changed between the two. Now, when it comes down to the feet, these pieces always kind of bothered me with the Mark 46. They tend to ride up, and in fact, on my Mark 46, they got stuck where they are supposed to sort of sit in there. As you can see, they don't really go as flush as I would like them to. They should sit nice and flush along the back there, but they definitely do stick up. I don't know if it's because of the way I have the foot, because if you do point it forward, then it's on an angle and it sits a little bit nicer, but nevertheless, when you do move it flat, so, you know, he can actually stand, it doesn't really work all that well. Nevertheless, this is, again, the same badass Mark 47 that we've gotten before, and honestly, I still love it. Now, because a lot of people have requested it, here is the Mark 47 with, of course, the lights off in the light box. And as you can see, the lights do shine a treat, and they are pretty much everywhere throughout the entire thing. The mini arc reactors do glow quite nicely. They are slightly more dim though compared to the large central one, which I guess does make sense. But overall, with the amount of lights that are included on this guy, I'm really impressed with the way they look. Now for the moment that I'm sure some people have been waiting for, here we have the weight comparison test. I'm about to channel my inner budget Stark. As you can see, the new guy weighs in at 896 grams versus the original recipe release, which weighs in at 893. So there is definitely a subtle difference between the two, with the new guy being slightly heavier. I don't know why that would be the case. As far as I'm aware, they are exactly the same in their construction, but they definitely have changed something about the two suits. Also, and you'll see this a little bit closer a little bit later in the video in the pros and cons segment, but the new guy is on the left, the original is on the right. Tell me, do you spot any differences in the red? Because trust me, in hand, I do. The new guy on the left is a lot more vibrant. There's a little bit more depth to the red, a little bit more punch, and I love the way it looks versus the original, which is still great and probably more movie accurate, being slightly darker, just like the Mark 46, but having them both in hand, I can't help but my eye is just drawn to the slightly more saturated, more punchy looking red on the new guy. Now for a quick side-by-side comparison, here we have the new Mark 47 on the left compared to the original on the right, and to make it simpler, I've got the lights on the new one and the lights off on the original. You can definitely see that they are the same figure, pretty much 100% identical between the two, except for the very subtle difference in the tone of the red. Also, the battle damage is slightly more detailed, which you'll see in the pros and cons segment, but other than that, they are kind of identical. If you have the original, unless you want the newly updated Tony Stark head sculpt and the slightly punchier looking red, I would hang on to the original release. There isn't a huge need to rush out and pick up this one unless you're a die-hard Iron Man collector, you have to get them all like me, or the fact that that kind of more vibrant, punchier looking red just speaks to you, because it definitely does for me. I love the way the new one looks. That punchier looking red gives it more of a comic book style feel, which I know is a bit of a cop-out because it is a comic book style character being Iron Man, but trust me, it just comes across so nicely in person. And just quickly before we move on, here we have Mark 47 standing alongside Spider-Man from Homecoming. This is the original version, not the new Far From Home movie promo edition, because a lot of people didn't actually pick that guy up. So here you have them standing side by side. Honestly, I love the way this looks. Looking through the lens right now, I can see that punchy red, I can see the vibrant blue and red on Spidey. They just complement each other perfectly. This right here is a recipe to an absolutely awesome looking shelf. Just going over articulation on the Iron Man Mark 47. Now bear in mind, this is my personal copy of the figure, so I'm going to be a little bit more careful. When you get yours in hand, I'm sure you can push the joints slightly further than I'm willing to go. Now starting off with the helmet itself, it is on a ball joint at the upper part of the head and then also down at the lower, so you do get a fairly decent range of motion, especially going back. That is absolutely insane. Now for the arms themselves, these shoulder pads are on floating joints, but before you move the arms, I always suggest pulling them outwards first, because you don't want to collide this shoulder pad with this piece of armor. So I like to pull it up, then move the arm upwards. You can see it goes pretty much all the way up. Same thing with going forward all of the way around, and a butterfly joint as well. You do have a swivel at the upper bicep, a double bend at the elbow, and of course a traditional 1/6 scale ball joint at the wrist itself. Now for the torso, as you'd expect, you do have a fairly decent range of motion already, but you can actually extend it, which is harder to do than you might think. There we go. And then it can flex even more forward and even more back, but it does expose the joint there and make him ever so slightly too tall, so you will want to collapse that if in fact you aren't using it. I'll have to do that off camera because it is a bit of a challenge. Now the legs themselves do move forward to about there before you start having to move pieces out of the way. They can of course drop down and go forward even further. You do have a swivel at the thigh there, they go out to about there. As you can see, they are fairly restricted going out actually, but I think that's more than enough for Iron Man. And of course at the knee, a fairly decent double bending ratchet, and finally down at the feet, a regular pivot and forward and back motion, as well as an Iron Man style toe joint. Just going over the 3 cool and 3 annoying things with the Mark 47, bear in mind this will pretty much deal with the original as well as the new one because they are technically identical. The first annoying thing is this drone attachment piece. First of all, it's super spiky at the base there, so when you're trying to plug it in, you will get spiked. Also, it doesn't really attach on there all that well. It does just like to fall off. Trust me, when you are trying to pose your Mark 47 around this thing and it gets slightly bumped, it will fall off and then you'll sigh, and of course, have to reattach it and spike yourself all over again. The second annoying thing has to do with the display base, and yes, you can fix it by maybe wrapping some tape or paper around that piece, but for some reason the attachment is super loose and it doesn't really like to stay in there. I know it's a bit of a basic complaint, but still it is rather frustrating when you're trying to pose the drone on there and the entire thing is wobbling around. Also, this piece doesn't like to push all the way down compared to the original, so there's definitely been some mold degradation with some of the pieces for the display base. The third annoying thing, and you probably all guessed it, but it's the flight effects for the feet. Why include them if you're not including a dynamic display base that you can use to have him flying? They look fairly good when they're attached, it makes him look like he's flying. But then again, you can't really use them unless you get really creative with the posing, like I've seen, having him flying horizontally, but then again, you risk damaging the paintwork on your figure, so I do think that this would have been a really nice piece if only that included a dynamic flight pole. The first cool thing about the new Mark 47 has to be the unhelmeted Tony Stark head sculpt. Something about it just blows me away. I love the updated paint process, the detail looks far and away sharper than the original, and still the sculpt definitely holds up. The second cool thing about the Mark 47 is they very slightly changed the hue of the red on the armor itself. You can see the new one on the front here versus the original on the back. It's a lot darker, whereas the new one is a little bit more punchy. It's got a little bit more life to it, and honestly, I prefer the way it looks. Also, the battle damage pieces themselves are pretty much the same in their printing process and the placement, except there's slightly more silver on the new one compared to the original, which was mostly just a black print with less of the silver. You can see it especially down on this bottom piece here, so there are definitely some subtle differences in the paint applications between the two suits. The third cool thing about the Mark 47, and I know, cop-out alert, but it's the fact that we are actually getting a second opportunity to pick him up. It doesn't happen all that often. Sure, you can go in the aftermarket and get him, but you'll be paying a pretty penny versus getting him at a retail store or from an online reseller. Now you can do that without having to worry about being hugely price gouged. But nevertheless, I know it will ruffle a lot of feathers that this guy is now for sale again. A lot of people do like the intrinsic value of having something go up in price in their collection. Nevertheless, I'm sure over the years this guy will still rise in value, but I don't know if people will be looking for the original or indeed this new one. Just wrapping up on the infamous Mark 47, the one that got away for a lot of people. Well, honestly, now is your opportunity to pick him up. This guy is straight up awesome. I don't think that was ever up for debate, and for once I don't think people will be mad at me for saying that he is that darn good, because he is. He's just an awesome figure all around. The paint application, fantastic. He's a die-cast Iron Man figure, which means the engineering is on point. The amount of accessories, the blast effects, the updated head sculpt, the little drone attachment, the empty helmet. This guy is jam-packed with accessories. Don't get me wrong, they have been used before in the original release, but that doesn't make them any less awesome. Not to mention the fact that there are so many lights dotted throughout this entire thing. When you flick all of those switches, and trust me, there are a lot, this thing comes to life. It looks beautiful. I love this piece. It was a grail for me back in the day. I paid through the nose to get that original one, and I'm so very glad that now collectors who are just coming into the fray, picking up their first figures, have the opportunity to get themselves a Mark 47. This is one that if you are an MCU fan and you want something unique that'll pop on the shelf, with now the more vibrant looking red, this guy will scratch that itch. He looks beautiful in person. That super vibrant cherry red with that metallic flake effect, slightly more silver in the battle damage effect here and there throughout the entire thing, just makes it look all the more realistic. The paint application on the Tony Stark head sculpt is far and away better, so that opens up a whole bunch more avenues for custom Tony Stark figures. There is that custom Mark 100 third-party figure where you can kit bash yourself an India Tony Stark wearing the robes with the flower sort of garnish around his neck, which actually I might now pick up and review on the channel because I've just reinvigorated my love for Spider-Man Homecoming simply by reviewing this figure right here. He is that good. Do yourself a favor, get him now while you can. If this guy sells out again, people wait on it. Because it's available, you may as well wait. No need to rush out and get it. Boom, it's sold out, it's unavailable, no second runs, you can't get it. You don't want a repeat of what happened last time. Pick this guy up while you can, and if you do want to do it, I got mine from toyswonderland.com. Link for that is in the description below. While you're down there, also check out the link to Six Scale Network, the brand new awesome Facebook group. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video.